I'm Robin Miller Brecker.
And I'm Karen Lenzer. Welcome to Seeking Center, the podcast.
Join us each week as we have the conversations and weed through the spiritual and holistic clutter for you. We'll boil it down to what you need to know now.
We're all about total wellness, which to us means building a healthy life on a physical, mental, and spiritual level. We'll talk to the trailblazers who will introduce you to the practices, products, and experiences that may be just what you need to hear about to transform your life.
If you're listening to this, it's no accident. Think of this as your seeking center and your place to seek your center. And for even more mega inspo, sign up for Seeking Center, the newsletter at seekingcenter.app. Karen and I are forever curious in finding ways to communicate with spirit. We know from our own experiences that everyone has their own way of translating messages, which help to facilitate healing and provide guidance to those that are in need. We immediately need to introduce you to them as well. Meet Tina Powers. She's a former news anchor and reporter, and says her career now as a spiritual medium and intuitive is reporting from the other side. In addition to her virtual private readings, Tina travels around the world conducting lectures and workshops on intuition and regularly holds private sessions at the world-renowned Miraval Resort. We had the privilege of having a reading with Tina, and it blew us away. Not only did we receive validation, guidance, and healing, we laughed, we cried, and we came away feeling motivated and lighter all around. We're going to dive into Tina's abilities, specifically from a reporter's perspective, plus how you can tap into the power of intuition. Hi, Tina.
Hi there. What an intro. Thank you.
What a life you've lived.
I always have had a couple lives within one lifetime. I think we all do, actually.
I agree. Somehow we plan it that way. Karen and I were reflecting on something you said the other day, which was, could you imagine even 10 years ago where you are today? And that goes to this idea of what you just said, of living all of these different lifetimes within one. So let's start with, how did things start for you in this life? We've heard you refer to yourself as a sensitive child. How did that sensitivity lead you to where you are today?
I think with sensitivity, and you both probably know, it's like the challenge and it's also the gift of being able to feel. And as a child, I didn't know what spirit. I just knew when I would go to sleep and I was in my room that I would sometimes hear people talking clear as a bell, and I couldn't see them. And it was very scary. I didn't have a peaceful feeling. I felt on alert. And then sometimes I would see like a hologram. That's the best way I can explain it, like a quick flash of a hologram, like in the 3D in the room of somebody that I didn't recognize. And it would send me straight to my parents' bedroom going, there are people in the room. And they were like, you're a drama queen. And I was like, I am a drama queen and there are people in the room.
Yes.
I think that children who come in, we have the knowing and the remembrance of so many in the other world. We haven't been trained yet, even in a well-meaning way, by adults or by what religion we are. We just know that we feel things and see things. And that's why the imaginary friend is there, who maybe most likely is a guide, or lots of kids point out to relatives that are in the other world for like grandma's here, or point to a picture. They can see. And so I think that natural ability, I think it's natural in all of us. Even if we don't see, we feel. So we all have different channels that some are stronger than others. I think it helped shape me because I was automatically in tune with people in this world on the planet, and also picking up other energies, which I didn't know what it was and didn't have anybody to talk to about it.
How did that develop over time? Were you an only child, by the way? Did you have siblings?
I have a brother, and he's younger and still always made fun of me growing up. He called me Bones because he said I talked to people.
Oh my goodness.
Until it happened to him. And that's another story. So they just thought that I was a little out there and they just had to go lightly with me.
So let's take a little fast forward into your teens and then obviously into your reporter years. Did you shut down these gifts during that time, or were they still with you?
I believe I shut them down, but I didn't know that I did because seeing scared me. I think a lot of us have done that where we're like, oh, wait, I'm not in control here. Things are just appearing, so I don't want it. I think always the clairsentient or feeling or the empath part of me was awake. I didn't know what it was called. I just assumed everybody could feel what was going on around the room. Even in the newsroom, if I fast forward to sitting there, I had my co-anchor, she would call me across the room and go, okay, what's happening and who shouldn't I talk to? And so we would laugh about that, but she'd say, you're more in tune. So I think it was always there, but not until I got out of the news business, did it really start to take off, come back, accelerate. And also I started to work on it.
What happened during those years, though, in the newsroom that ended up having you leave? Because we know it's a super interesting story.
There's one component of this story. I think I had 5 or 6 bosses, and 5 of them, when you get a new boss, they have to like you and it becomes all this pressure. And especially if you're the one that is telling the news and so on. So there are 2 components here, big ones. The last one who came in, she was a woman, and I was so excited to have a female boss. And I'll have to tell you, maybe it was a past life, maybe it was whatever, but she did not like me. She didn't fire me, but she made it really difficult. I would be about to go on air and she'd say things like, I don't know what it is I don't like about you on air, but I'll let you know what it is. And then I would have to go out there and anchor the news. Now, I did learn to be very strong because talk about having to focus and tune everything out and then have that voice in your head before you go. It was a big training. I didn't really realize at that time, I think that there were, because I was naive, that people would possibly even be jealous of just somebody who was happier, etc. Now, that was one component. The biggest one is that I was called to a drive-by shooting. We heard it on the scanner. And part of the newsroom is you have the day laid out of the stories you're going to cover. And then you always have to be ready for breaking news. And so things can change on a dime. And I was sent out because they said that a child had been shot. And so the photographer and I were one of the first ones on the scene. And the child, he was a 13-year-old. He had a tarp over him. I was there with the police information officer, and the father came on the scene and saw his son in this state. It was just so beyond witnessing that and witnessing somebody's pain and rawness of that. I went, what am I doing? Like, I am photographers taping this. We're going to go on air with this. I was never, a reporter likes to have a story that nobody else has, but it's so turned around backwards and exclusive. And especially in a case like this. So I felt ashamed. I just knew I wasn't part of a solution. And I woke up. And so I ended up crossing the line, I think, from where a reporter is to, I would even say, go as far as a grief counselor without knowing that I was the empath part of me. And so I talked to him at the scene. He invited me into his home with his family, and we sat there and mourned for several hours. And he asked me to please not follow him around, how the reporter follows around. And I gave my word. And when we went back to the station after that, they said, we're sending you back out. There's a candlelight vigil. These were gang members who did it. We're going to follow up. And I just looked at the producer and I said, you know what, I can't. And of course, at that point, I grew 3 heads because they're like, what do you mean you can't? And I said, I gave my word, and this man is in such grief that I just simply can't go back on it. And I knew at that time, in taking that stand, especially with an unhealthy environment, that I wasn't going to be looked upon so very well. So at that moment, I scurried to find my own way out before somebody else took the power. Now, along the way, if I saw this news director, and I believe she ended up maybe in San Francisco. If I saw her now, though, I would give her a hug. You know why? Because I wouldn't be sitting right here. I wouldn't have gone this trajectory if I would have had the same 5 news directors. I really had to look at, even though it was painful, do I love this? Is this my calling? And do I want to go to a bigger market? Because there was an offer for that. And I didn't. I jumped ship to a radio station, and everybody was like, how could she do that? That's the whole story in a nutshell of why I left.
It takes such bravery at that time in your career too, to be able to really know that. I think so many of us feel like, oh, I've gone this far. This is where I should be. How did you then take that after the radio station down the path of really fine-tuning your abilities as a medium?
I took a job at a morning radio show. It was a 70s radio station, and we had to be funny at 4:35 in the morning, which was, I don't even know how I made it there. I looked like a roadie from Leonard Skinner. I'm like, I don't even know how I drove here this early. But that was before the times also of streaming, where I have to be mindful. I don't know if we would have had the audience we had if they would have seen me, or maybe it would have garnished ratings. But that extemporaneousness of that and the freedom in the improv was really good for me. At that point, he would make fun of me. He'd be like, what do your spirit guides have to say today? It would be like, yeah, that you need to work on yourself, Royce. So we would have fun with that. But I would get off at 10 in the morning and head straight over to, it's where they had standing stores more now. Everything wasn't virtual. And I would go to this beautiful Barnes and Noble. And I always loved the mystical. I wanted to know the truth. I knew at a very young age, even looking around at everything, I could see that there was so much more. So I would read every book. I would sit there and buy some, read some, and spend hours there. Eventually, I ended up moving to Indiana. Somebody like me who was interested in metaphysical wasn't exactly a perfect fit. Now, when I went there, it's gorgeous. And it turns out that there's a place called Camp Chesterfield. And I'm like, what's this? And it's outside of Indianapolis. And it was founded like in the late 1800s or turn of the century. And I didn't really know what a medium did, but it's like all these mediums live there, clairvoyants. You could go to church there. So I went with my then mother-in-law. We're like, we got to check this out. So we go to church, and I grew up Catholic. We're in mass and they're talking to dead people. I'm like, what is this? And so spiritualism, my understanding is they want to prove that there's life and intelligent life after the physical body. So they do all sorts of demonstrations. And so all these people were receiving messages from what they call the platform. They're now called more gallery readings. And John Edward made that. He was really brave and really paved the way for a lot of us that do this work, because he would just stand in it and do it. And it was amazing to watch. What helped a thought form in humanity go, is this possible? And so in this service, I was just, my jaw had dropped, and these people are crying, and they did something called psychometry. They did all these demonstrations. And psychometry is when you read an object. A lot of medium psychics use this. Some might hold a crystal, some might hold a watch that belonged to somebody, or a ring, but they had a basket and I put my ring in it, and you just didn't know if you were going to get read. And I was like the last one, and the woman pulled out my ring, and she looks at it and she goes, oh, you're going to school. And then she put the ring back. And I'm like, all these people are crying and I'm going to school. So I'm like, okay. And I just remember thinking, nah, what, like, where are my mind-blowing messages? And then at the end of the service, the very end, they said, we're having a seminary and we are doing clairvoyant circles. You can get a degree. It was in mediumship. And I said, I guess I'm going to school. So I stayed.
Wow.
And so Indiana was super important. I don't know that everything would have unfolded in the way it did if I wasn't living there.
Wow. I'd never heard of Camp Chesterfield.
There's Camp Chesterfield, and then there's also Lilydale.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Their sister, that's the same spiritualism.
And so did you go to, was that like a full-time thing?
No, they had seminaries. So there would be like a week-long immersive. And they're just like, park your ego at the door. I'm all of a sudden in a clairvoyant circle with the teacher, and she's like, get up and give a message. And I'm like, I don't even know. She's, park your ego at the door. This isn't about being right. Just give the first thing that comes into your mind. And I remember going, okay, I hear the word art. And she said, that's my husband's name. He's passed over. And so we're in. And she had a talk with me, because I did go several times, but mine worked somewhat differently. It was more organic. It's like with painting, you find all the techniques and then you go your own style.
How do you receive the messages?
I have a prayer that I always say before each session, and it's not religious. I would call it spiritual, in asking for the highest information possible and lifting, because here's the thing, we can get information as psychics, but we want the highest available. And when we ask, we receive much more than if we forget about asking for it. So it just sets the stage as we have free will. So I say my prayer, and then I just open to spirit, and then my clairaudient clairaudience, it's one of my strongest. I have clairvoyance and clairaudience, and all of a sudden I'll just start hearing. Sometimes I hear them just talking away. Sometimes they will download like a whole paragraph, like boom. It's very interesting. Or they'll also flash a picture many times in my mind's eye. It's almost, I explain it like when we dream and we see pictures, nobody could tell us that we don't see pictures. When I'm reading, I see pictures. And so it's like dreaming awake, but you're not. So it's called mental mediumship. So sometimes things will just come out of my mouth. You both have probably done that before when we don't think so much and we allow. We've been so trained in this culture. We better get it perfect because if you don't have it perfect. And my main intention was I never wanted to hurt anyone or bring any more grief. Is it a perfect science? It had to be pretty good or have me feel confident in what I was receiving to do it for people. But what is perfect? I had this great teacher that said, for as right as you can be, Tina, don't be afraid to be wrong. That's what calm me down.
Yeah.
Because the calmer the channel is, the information expands. I can certainly read if it's like reading the edges of those old vinyl records. When somebody's really clammed up, I could still read, but the more that we can relax, allow, and healthy skepticism is good. We should all have that with everything. But my understanding is skeptic was a term for another solution, a Greek word, not I don't believe and prove it to me.
And that had been hard going from being a reporter and thinking.
Oh, yeah. I had to be fact checked. You would be sued. It was a real letting go and allowing, but I felt really supported energetically with all of this. And my guides and spirit, they kept sending people who were safe at first. And certainly reading at Miraval, doing cold readings for many years, it's been really good for me. But I've had people go, what did I have for breakfast?
Oh.
And I've gotten better where I go, your guides don't care. And I don't either. So if this doesn't help you, then we can find somebody else. So I've learned, hey, and it can still come out of left field because let's face it, working in this world, a lot of people are opening up their own gifts. But it's still taught in a way that it's crazy. And I'm like, what? I think that people are crazy who don't believe or open their mind that there could be some other things here.
Oh, yeah. One of the things, it just triggered a thought when we had our reading with you that I thought was so interesting, at least the way you stated it, was that you pick up on the energy, not only of the person that you're reading, obviously, but also on the energy of the people that you're bringing in. It was so funny when you brought Robin's dad in. First of all, it was hysterical how you two are interacting. But you said his energy actually raised you up, or some of the energy that you read really drain you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And doing readings, sometimes people go, oh, she's just pulling that out of nowhere. That shouldn't be a problem. And it's no, it's almost like you're holding an electrical current between the worlds. So you have to be very careful of your own energy system when you're in the middle. Since the very beginning, when energy started coming through and souls started making themselves known, I can most notably many times feel their personality, whether it was buoyant. And of course, my guides are laughing right now. They're showing the best of themselves sometimes because they're in the light, but also the personality of that recent lifetime. That's how you know it's your person. It's those details sometimes that mean the most. It wouldn't mean something to somebody else, but to you, you would know. Now, if we're dealing with, I remember I had a woman come and she just had lost her life force and her mom came through, and it was heavy because there was some big apologies there, meaning of what the mother had been carrying. Now, if I go higher in my vibration, and this is if I get tired, I know that, okay, it's time for me to close down if I'm too tired, because I can tend to take things on sometimes then. It's a fine line, but this woman was just so distraught, and the mother came through from the other side showing me a legal document. I can still remember that. And what had happened is that she was written out of the will. And so here she was walking around thinking that her mother never really loved her. And then the mother came through and said that she didn't even know what she was signing toward the end. This was not
a deliberate.
And so there was a lot of confusion for her around this situation. And it was so interesting. And I thought that's why I would allow myself to be a messenger, because her life force by the time she left looked so much better. But that sort of energy, when we've been holding on, so the person in front of me is in really deep grief, it can be a balancing act. Now, sometimes if I'm doing a gallery reading, or there's a lot of people, I honestly feel my guides, I'm in a grace, and that's the best way. It's like protection. I remember being in a group of a couple hundred people, and this boy Jeffrey came through, and the woman stands up. And then the thing that's wonderful about groups is then everybody comes together on the same page with her and Jeffrey, and it's just this love, right? And Jeffrey keeps telling me that she put something in her purse, and it's the last thing he gave her, and it has handwriting on it. And she's, nope, nope. And then I can hear him clairaudiently going, no, it's in her purse. So this was a real test for me. So I just did it and I said, it's in your purse. No, no, no. So then we moved on. Now, thank goodness, see, if I tune into that, then I could go down in energy, and then it's harder to hold it up. And I can be wrong. I'm human. But he was so adamant. Afterwards, I could tell. And if I read the people's thoughts, they're like, wow, that was a miss. People are waiting. I don't know why people are like this, but they're waiting. Then they're the greatest audience when it's a hooray and everybody's together. But it is funny how the negativity can take off. So I'm signing books after this meeting. And okay, I see the woman out of the corner of my eye, and she comes up and she's just sobbing. And out of her purse, she pulls this handkerchief and it says Barbara on it in embroidery. And she throws it across the table. She goes, I put this in my purse this morning. I completely forgot that I did this. And I know it's him. And so the person that was with me is, she done that with the 200 people. And I'm like, that would have been nice, but I knew that I'm going to listen to them in the other world. And also she was so sure that I was wrong, that the fact that it was right, like it just gave her comfort. Wild ride.
Shows you that you need to come into these readings as much as possible, open and receptive as well. And although Robin and I talk all the time, it can be hard as the sitter to always interpret because it's such an avalanche of information and you so want the information and you expect sometimes a certain kind of information or a certain person to come through. But when they don't, it's hard to re-gear your brain.
It is. You get sad. That's why. So it's really good to go in with an open mind, because I remember I had this Pokey show up once and I'm like, Pokey's here. That's my horse. I don't want to talk to my horse. And I'm like, I do. Maybe there's a soul contract here or something really important. As humans, the expectation is really a tough thing. I do believe we get what we need in a reading if it's a good reading. Now, we just have to trust. Different things come through at different times. But certainly in working with parents, because I do work with a group called Helping Parents Heal, they are hoping, of course, and that's a great devastation if they don't. So there's a lot of pressure, but then I have to step back from it and remember, it's not me. Have the channel clear. We go back to what's our intention. It's to help, it's to heal, it's to be of service. It's not about me. And so when I can step back, it's pretty wild. But I do have people also that have gone, I'll be like, Philip's here. I don't want to talk to Philip. I don't like him. And I'm like, how's that going? You're trying to control what's going on the earth and the other world. How's that going for you? There may need to be a healing here with Philip before you get the rest of your goodies.
Your point is so important because especially if people have never had a reading.
Yes.
And they do go in with these certain expectations of who they're going to hear from. And sometimes you hear from people you didn't even really know on this earth, or it could be a great grandma.
They know somebody who you know, or they,
Exactly. And to your point, you're like, but that's not who I came to hear from. I think that there is an education, which is why we have these conversations.
And sometimes I have found that things make sense later on.
Yes.
The reading will go out and we might not understand what a certain thing is. And then later on, it's, you hear it in a new way.
Absolutely true. And that was true of our reading, even. I was thinking about you brought through my grandmother, and she was a little different in this reading than she's been in past readings because I think she needed to get a different type of message to me than she did last time. And I remember you talking about her being in church and going to Lourdes and all these things that, of course, nobody else really knows except for my mother. But I really walked away, not really sure why she was talking about those things. And then I realized she wants me to pray as well as do all of my other spiritual work that I'm doing. And don't forget to say a prayer to God that you get what you need. And that's very her. And so I just love that you're able to interpret it in your own way, but then you're right, letting that sitter take that recording back and listen to it again and decipher it in their own
Yes.
language.
Well, because sometimes, and that's the other part of it, you are an incredible channel and reader. And at the same time, to what we're talking about here, sometimes you have the person who's receiving the reading does need to take that time and understand that some things are not so literal. There are certain aspects where you can, without a doubt, say, this person is showing me something that's handwritten, it's in your purse. But there are other times where there may be an overarching theme and or something about a broken heart, let's say. And that broken heart, it may be interpreted in several different ways.
Several ways. And also, I have noticed they'll do evidentiary things so that it's them. And then there's a larger picture sometimes, and you'll get that. Like they have us do a little bit of our own work. So here's how I believe it works. When you get a hit about something after a reading, it's what it is. It comes in, it's very succinct. You get the knowing, and then you take it from there. So it's multi-layered.
That's so true. And I know in this particular reading that we had with you, and there were so many incredible nuggets that came through and people that came through. I think for the two of us in our endeavor that we're working on right now, and something that you would not know at all was that in these last few weeks, we've been talking about Louise Hay every day and really talking about Hay House. And for those that are listening that are familiar with Hay House Media, there have been so many incredible practitioners and experts and teachers that have come through there. And we've been talking, and Louise herself, obviously, who started it. And Louise Hay showed up in our reading. And I nearly fell off my chair because, first of all, what? And,
Of all people. And Wayne Dyer on top, who was her second in command, who I have read all of his books, who I've met in person at a Louise Hay event and have called upon too at many times in my lifetime. So it just felt so on time for what we were talking about literally at that time. It would have been great anyway, but the fact that we were literally just talking about them made it that very evidentiary moment.
And of course they'd want to come in. They were already on that plane. So you all have been talking about them in various ways. So of course they would want to make themselves known. And also that help was available to you all as well.
Yes.
Your endeavors, because you guys are doing some big work and remembering, and sometimes it's hard. It's like pushing something uphill and we make progress and then it's, oh gosh, here's another block. Okay, we make progress. And then to know and not forget that there's a whole other energy that is listening that can help us. So that surprised me too. That's the last thing I expected. They wanted to get in here.
And that's actually a question we had for you is we know you read for so many different types of people. And so to us, that was the first time that anyone in our humanness of that like caliber for what we're doing has come through one of our readings. So it was so special. And do notable people come through your readings on the regular?
You know what? Usually what I found is the person I'm reading for is the touch point. So if the person I'm with has had a relationship with somebody notable or influential, or if we want to say famous, they'll get my attention. But it's usually the people I'm with. So that does and can happen. In the spiritual world, they're all like, hey, we're just all over here and it's not. Yeah. And let's face it, certain people have done really big things before they left this earth plane. And I remember once, and he doesn't mind me talking about it, I was reading for this lovely man. He was from France. And fortunately, I didn't know. It was when I think they were testing out how the mediumship was. And there was a certain element that was worried, what are we doing here at a wellness resort? So he came in and I was giving him messages and he was saying, okay. And then all of a sudden I heard it was Billie Jean really loud. I believe that was the song, Michael Jackson's song. And a lot of times I hear songs, I don't know. And when my clairaudience first started opening up, I would hear angelic choirs and all sorts of music, which is really cool. And music's on a higher dimension, which is why we can hear our favorite song and all of a sudden forget about everything else that's going on. It's energizing. But I'm reading for him and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, do I say it? So finally I just said, okay, do you know Michael Jackson? And he stares at me and he almost starts crying. And he said he used to call me at 3 a.m. every night for a period of time. This gentleman had played a father role for him. I had no idea. And he said in that song, I guess he was affiliated with Euro Disney, the gentleman at one time. And he said, I used to take him overnight because he couldn't go normally. And he said that song, he performed that song for the janitorial crew overnight. And so there were messages for him and there was all this, but he had the relationship with him.
Wow, I have the chills. That was such evidence. It was like there end up being other messages, but there's that evidence.
Yeah. And then what I've seen happen is what spirit does is they might give a big thing like boom. And then you look at everything else a little more deeply because it can seem like the wisdom is light, but it's really not from them.
That's right.
Which is why you need to say everything that comes.
Right. Exactly. If I wouldn't have said that because I was worried about myself and being deemed crazy, he wouldn't have had the gift of that kind of a closure or connection. So it does happen, but not always. It depends on the sitter.
It was such further motivation for us in a direction that I would say others have discouraged us from. So it was what we needed to hear in order to move forward with, I think, where our hearts are.
Yep.
So.
And at a certain point, we just don't accept no anymore. Any great thing that's been done, there were all the naysayers. And yet still here we have all of these things that have manifested. So I remember when I've just written 2 books, but I wrote one and somebody was like, oh, don't bother with it. Everybody writes a book. And I'm thinking, but I haven't written a book. And then when I walked in at the time of Barnes Noble, I was like, look at all these minds that have written books.
Yes.
So why would I let that discourage me? Because it's about the energy and the certain gifts that we have to give.
I love too that when you do a reading, you were so clear to us when ours began that there was a lot of energy in the room, that there were a lot of lights, I think is how you put it. And I think it's also important to remind people that when they go, your angels and guides can come through, as well as your deceased loved ones with messages. And it's just such an affirming feeling that they're all working together for your highest good. So it's, again, even more reason to say to people, don't go in there with this preconceived notion, because how wonderful to hear from your angels and guides and utilize them as well as this team of people who have gone before on the other side.
And I know it's really hard. I do cold readings. That's what I do. But the more that we can just allow, the more you're going to get exactly what they want you to get. And it depends. You all know from the audience knows from your feeling that you get with somebody too.
Yes.
So you can feel what the intention is. You can feel if it's more about the person or they're trying to pound you to get you the message. And spirit doesn't do that. I think that it just takes the element of out that, hey, I could interpret something wrong, but you just allow it. It's going to make sense. It's just allowing it on both ends as you have a much better experience.
If someone is trying to tune into their own intuitive abilities, is there anything that you can suggest that they start to do?
It's like quantum physics. What we start focusing on, we start pulling into more in our lives. So as we start to focus on working on ourselves or being the best version of ourselves that we could be, certainly getting quiet is big because there's all this external coming at us all the time. And we can forget who we are and our connection to spirit, to our guides, and forget that we have helpers because it's all going so fast. I've gone through different ways of meditating. I used to do Wayne Dyer's Om for a period of time, and that was really helpful. And if we're really busy, I know this is, maybe I'm being a little lazy, but when I'm in between the worlds, so when you first wake up and you're still foggy, sometimes I will lay there for another 10 minutes and ask my guides if they have a message for me for the day, ask about a problem I might be having. I tune in. I notice when I do this, the red carpet's rolled out a little more because I'm connected in starting my day rather than reacting. I'm responding. So getting quiet is really important. And it's hard. It's not taught in our culture. So even if you can take in between meetings, 5 minutes, close your eyes, go inward, even just get quiet. You can start. We all receive messages. I do not believe that there are only some people who can do what I do and others can't. I believe we're all born with an internal GPS system. We all might register it differently or we're not taught about it, but we all have it. Also, find those people that you can resonate with who are out there that you're interested in. Read their books, listen to their podcasts. There's a really great reader out of Chicago who I really admire. Her name's Sonia Choquette, and she has a great book called Ask Your Guide.
It's one of my favorite books.
And on audio, it's a great way for even for people who've been practicing all of this to go back and do her meditations. She and my teacher and Julia Kemp, there was this group of women. I don't know her. I respect her very much. And even before I started reading, I had a reading with her, and her energy was just very pure. So those are places that I'd start taking workshops. Take a leap of faith. I remember in the newsroom, my mother handed me The Artist's Way and said, unblock your creativity, learn to go back to what it is that you love. And so I went to Taos, New Mexico. I took a journey. I took a chance. She talks about leap and the net appears, and we get ready. We arrive at a decision. We don't just always make it, like, unless we're forced to. Sometimes there are split decisions, and then there's some that we arrive at. But if I wouldn't have gone to Taos, sometimes I go, wow, I wouldn't have met my teacher, who was Julia's friend. And
yeah, talk about that for a second.
So Julia, she's very psychic. She said, and she's a world-class writer, and she said that her guides gave her that book, The Artist's Way. So it's a great 12-step program for unblocking your creativity, where we took U-turns when we were younger, where maybe somebody told us we weren't good at something, and to get back into serendipity. But she had a reader named Rhonda Fleming, after the actress, and Rhonda looks like a fairy. She's never aged, and she read tarot, and she was available. And so I was taught that some people say tarot, some people say tarot. I think both are fine. But I had never had a reading before and was taught that those archetypes, you better, that's not a good thing. And so I'm like, I'm going to do it. And my mom was with me. And I said, I think you should do it too. Let's just see. And it was the best experience. It was because of her reading, though. She was at a very high level. She used to tell me, we have to work on ourselves. You can only read as high as you've worked on yourself. So the clearer we get our windshield. Now, somebody can be a great artist and their personality is different, but with spirituality, they might let people see a few things, but it's not going to be that love underneath. It's going to be more about the perfunctory, the thing, the da. But as we grow, there's different components in a reading. So she taught me what a really great reading looks like, what it feels like, most importantly, and how those energies can help me in my life and how they can help me move forward. So it's always the reader and the interpreter.
But also too, for the sitter, I think one of the great things that you did even with us was if there wasn't clarity in the message that we received from you, you always went back and asked for more clarity.
Oh, yep.
So helpful, because sometimes I think, especially if you're new to this and you're just sitting the first time, you're just drinking it all in and you're almost afraid to break the energy.
Yeah, and you can't break it. At least with me, until we close, it is open. So you're allowed to speak. You're allowed to ask questions. And also, I will say conversely, if you feel like something's scaring you and it doesn't feel right, use your free will to say, hey, this doesn't feel right. Because spirit does not scare you.
That's right.
It's a high vibe. Even if there's a correction, let's say, I remember when I first started and Rhonda said to me, it was the way it was presented. She goes, we all have things to work on here. But years ago, she goes, I can see a bit of a blaming pattern. And I was like, oh, and she said, point the finger at yourself before you do anybody else. Look at it that you have the power to do whatever. And don't let that rule. But the way she presented it, I could hear it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Any regrets, Tina, about leaving the reporter desk behind and going to do this reporting from the other side?
No, I will say I still love telling people's stories. With the way some of the news is now, it's way different than when I first started, because news used to be something new. And now there's gossip. It's stuff about people's lives. It's just not really news. And I speak about this when I talk TikTok that start counting the news stories. The first one's pretty bad. And then the next one, news can keep us in fear.
Yes.
And then we go, oh, what's the use? Look at the world isn't a safe place. And I'm like, there weren't 9 stories today in the whole entire world. Yes, there are things we need to know about without question, but to watch them over and over on a loop is not healthy. It's like spoon-feeding negativity. I would say I miss telling stories and being of service in a way because the media can be used for the positive as a call to action. I genuinely believe that people do want to make a difference. We want to matter that we lived here on the planet, and there is some spark inside of us, I believe, that wants to wake up and do our purpose. We can be in hypnosis. I've been there too, where you just do the same thing over and over until you wake up. But sometimes in media, if you see a story where it pulls your heart or you go, oh my gosh, we start asking, what could we do? What could we do to make our lives better, make the community better, make the world better? And I do believe I talked to you guys about this, about putting together a show where it's not just about reporting good news, it's important news. It's people that are influencing things in the direction. I will say it only takes an amount of light to, hey, you flip on a light switch in a room to turn on the light. My intention is to tell stories in the future that use this skill as a reporter in a different way. I already feel I use it as a medium to report the story of somebody else over there and maybe to hopefully help be a facilitator for healing and good. There's power in the media, having it be in the right direction instead of the negativity is my goal.
We are behind you 100,000%.
And the gift that you're giving is so impactful for good. You're literally looking at someone's life and interpreting it for them in a way that they can hear it. And hopefully will give them that peace and healing, like you said, and just multiplying that over time has.
And it's relief because maybe we can go, all right, we know everyone's okay, or there's some evidence here that there is something after this life. So I can concentrate on my own and not spend the rest of my life in huge grief. Yes, we think about it, but also knowing that we will see them again, that we came in with a specific mission, all of us, and that really it's about living the truest version of ourselves.
Yes. Thank you so much.
you.
Where can people find you? What's the best place that people should visit in order to potentially work with you or read your book? All of that.
Yeah. So tinapowers.com is where you can find me. And I do have the most wonderful person named Mary Monahan. She used to work at Miraval. And so I'm really grateful. She helps me. And so myself or Mary will get back to you, but that's the best place to find me. There's a book called Reporting for the Other Side. We're working on a third book. It has a lot of animal stories in it from the spiritual standpoint. I am at Miraval once a month. Miraval is a very special place. The land helps you feel yourself again. It's a very sacred land. And so the healers there are wonderful. And then usually on my site, it'll be like where I'm traveling to, but I'm always grateful to hear from people.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being on this journey with you.
And I look forward to being with the both of you. Thank you for having me on your show. And thank you for doing the show.
I mean, these conversations, like you were saying, we could do this all day, every day.